The generators hummed. That was the first thing you noticed underground. The constant, low hum of machinery that never slept, pushing recycled air through concrete corridors that smelled of dust and diesel and something older, something institutional, the particular scent of rooms that had never seen daylight. Somewhere above, Tehran breathed its ordinary night. Traffic, street vendors, the call to prayer fading into cool February air. But down here, 40 feet beneath a residential district in the northern part of the city, the world was different. The world was controlled. The world was safe. That was what the men inside the compound believed. They had reasons to believe it. The location had been selected with extraordinary care. Not the obvious compound, not the well-documented facility that Western satellites had been staring at for years, but a secondary site, deliberately unremarkable from above, its security architecture buried underground where thermal imaging would struggle and signal intelligence would find only silence. The air defense systems positioned around the district pointed outward, the way air defenses always did. The communication protocols were tight. Couriers moved between nodes rather than signals. The high-value occupant inside that compound had spent years building a life defined by invisibility. And invisibility, he believed, was the only armor that truly held. His name was Mojtaba Khamenei. His father, the supreme leader of the Islamic Republic of Iran, was also in Tehran that night, and the aircraft were already in the air. February 28th, 2026, began as a night of calculated precision and ended as something far more complicated. A strike that killed one of the most consequential leaders in the Middle East, wounded or incapacitated his successor, and triggered a chain of events that intelligence analysts and military strategists are still, months later, attempting to fully understand. Because what happened to Mojtaba Khamenei, what truly happened in those concrete corridors beneath northern Tehran, remains one of the most contested intelligence questions of the ongoing Iran war. Iranian officials said he survived with minor injuries. Western intelligence assessments suggested something far more severe. Unverified reports, fragmentary and contradictory, pointed toward outcomes darker still. He was elevated to supreme leader within days, and then he disappeared. Not physically, perhaps, but from every measure by which the outside world confirms the existence of a functioning leader, public appearances, verified video, direct speech, independent confirmation of any kind, Mojtaba Khamenei became, in the weeks following the strike, what he had always been professionally and strategically: a ghost. This is the story of how intelligence agencies found that ghost, how they tracked a man who had spent his entire adult life learning to be invisible, how they built a targeting picture from shadows and silences and behavioral anomalies so subtle that any single one of them could have been dismissed as noise. And it is the story of what the strike achieved and what it didn't, and why that distinction matters. Not just militarily, not just politically, but as a study in the nature of modern warfare itself. Because the physical strike lasted seconds, the consequences are still unfolding. Before we go further, I want to take a moment and let you know what this channel is about. Every episode, we bring you real intelligence stories. Not Hollywood versions, not dramatized approximations, but the actual operations, the genuine tradecraft, the real human decisions behind events that shaped history and are shaping it right now. The 2026 Iran War is one of the defining intelligence stories of our era. And this particular chapter, the hunt for Mojtaba Khamenei and the uncertainty that followed, is as intricate and consequential as anything we've covered. If that's the kind of story that makes you want to keep listening, hit subscribe and turn on notifications. We're here every day. And this story is just getting started. Oh, and one more thing before we dive in. I'd love to know where you're listening from. Drop a comment below with your city and country. Are you listening from London, Tel Aviv, New York, Cairo? Let me know. I read every single one. Now, back to the man who learned to disappear. To understand why finding Mojtaba Khamenei was so difficult, you first have to understand who he was, or more precisely, who he chose not to be. In most political systems, power announces itself. Leaders speak at podiums. Their schedules are published, at least partially. Their movements generate visible disruptions. Motorcades, security cordons, the particular energy of public presence. Even in closed systems like Iran, where information is controlled and appearances are managed, leadership tends to produce a certain observable footprint. Mojtaba Khamenei had spent decades eliminating his. He held no formal government title, he gave no speeches, he made no public statements that could be independently attributed. He did not appear in photographs distributed to state media. While his father, Ali Khamenei, delivered sermons, received delegations, and maintained the visible apparatus of supreme leadership, Mojtaba operated in a parallel space, present at decisions without appearing in records of them, influential without being formally accountable, powerful without being visible. His influence was real and substantial. Within the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, the IRGC, the military and ideological force that functions as the true spine of Iranian state power, Mojtaba had spent years building relationships, managing access, and quietly shaping the alignment of senior officers whose loyalty was operationally critical. He was, in the language of intelligence analysis, a node of significant centrality in Iran's command network. Remove him, and connections broke. Weaken him, and the architecture of IRGC loyalty around his father's succession became uncertain. This was precisely why Western intelligence agencies had begun paying him serious attention, not just in the weeks before the February 28th strike, but in the months before it. The CIA's analytical focus on Iranian succession dynamics had sharpened considerably in the years prior, and the reasoning was strategic rather than personal. When assessing a closed authoritarian system, experienced intelligence planners will often tell you that the current leader is less important than what comes after. Ali Khamenei was aging. His health had been the subject of persistent speculation for years. The question of succession inside Iran, who would replace him, who would hold the loyalty of the IRGC, who would command the apparatus of the state through the inevitable transition, was, from a strategic standpoint, arguably more consequential than the current leadership arrangement itself. Mojtaba was the most likely answer to that question, and he was doing everything possible to remain untrackable. He moved rarely and unpredictably. His communications were tightly controlled and deliberately minimal, relying on couriers and face-to-face interactions wherever possible, using encrypted channels only in short, fragmented bursts that offered minimal interception windows. His security detail was drawn from IRGC units with extreme vetting protocols, and their patterns were rotated frequently enough to prevent routine surveillance from establishing reliable baselines. In intelligence terms, this is called a low-signature target, and low-signature targets do not yield to conventional methods. You cannot simply watch the man because the man is not visible. You cannot intercept his communications with any reliability because his communications are designed to resist interception. You cannot build a pattern from his movements because his movements are designed to be patternless. What you can do, what experienced targeting teams learn to do, is watch everything around him instead. This approach has a formal name inside intelligence circles: network-based targeting. Rather than fixing on the individual, analysts map the ecosystem of people, logistics, communications, and behaviors that must exist around any high-value target, regardless of how carefully that target conceals themselves. The target can disappear, but the security apparatus that keeps them safe cannot disappear. The supply chains that keep an underground facility functional cannot disappear. The communications among the officers responsible for the target's protection cannot simply go silent without creating their own distinctive signature. And so analysts began mapping the network, not Mojtaba himself, but everything his concealment required. Security detail rotation schedules became data points. When patterns changed, analysts noted the deviation. When encrypted traffic shifted in volume or transmission mode among mid-level IRGC officers responsible for senior leadership protection, that shift was logged and analyzed. Air defense positioning around key locations in Tehran was tracked not for what it defended against, but for what it suggested about what was being protected. Even mundane logistical details, delivery schedules to specific facilities, power consumption patterns, medical supply movements, were fed into the analytical picture. Any single data point was noise. Taken together, accumulated over weeks and months, they began to form something else, a pattern, and eventually a break in it. The break came approximately 3 weeks before the strike. It arrived, as many critical intelligence breaks do, not as a dramatic revelation, but as a subtle anomaly embedded in data that could easily have been overlooked. An intercepted communication, fragmentary, encrypted, seemingly routine in its traffic characteristics, revealed something small but significant. A convoy route had changed. A meeting that had been scheduled at one location had been relocated, apparently at the last minute. To most observers, that kind of change means nothing. Meetings get relocated, schedules shift. In a city as complex and security-conscious as Tehran, logistical adjustments happen constantly. But in intelligence analysis, pattern breaks are not background noise. They are signals. Specifically, they are often the most reliable signal that something or someone of elevated importance is involved. Routine activities follow routine patterns precisely because routine is efficient. When efficiency is abandoned in favor of unpredictability, when routes change without obvious logistical reason, when locations shift at the last moment, when the ordinary rhythm of movement suddenly becomes erratic, the most common explanation is that the people managing those movements are protecting something they consider critical. The intercepted communication also revealed something about its own transmission characteristics. It was sent in short burst mode, an encrypted transmission style that compresses and fires a signal in a fraction of the normal transmission window, reducing the opportunity for interception. Short burst transmission is technically available to any encrypted system, but in practice, it tends to be used selectively. The additional operational burden of short burst protocols makes them impractical for routine communications. They are typically reserved for situations where the intercepted signal would be catastrophically damaging, which is to say, for situations involving the physical proximity of someone extremely important. The convoy route change plus short burst transmission protocols was not on its own definitive, but it was enough to significantly elevate the analytical priority of what was happening in that district of Tehran. Surveillance intensified. Satellite coverage that had been conducting periodic sweeps of northern Tehran shifted into continuous tracking mode for a broader area, allowing analysts to observe behavioral patterns across an entire district rather than monitoring specific known locations. The advantage of this approach is that it captures secondary effects, the way that a high-value presence ripples outward through surrounding behaviors, rather than relying on direct observation of a target that may not be directly observable. What the intensified coverage revealed was striking. Underground activity in the district showed thermal signatures consistent with sustained occupancy of subsurface structures. People, equipment, and machinery generating heat in spaces that above ground appeared largely dormant. This was not unusual for known government facilities, but the specific location and the specific timing were anomalous relative to baseline patterns. More significant was what happened with the air defense systems. Air defense in a major urban environment is typically oriented outward, positioned to detect and intercept threats approaching from outside the perimeter. This is logical. Threats arrive from outside. Defense faces outward to meet them. When analysts reviewed the satellite data from the days preceding the strike, however, they observed something that inverted this logic. Air defense units in one section of northern Tehran had repositioned inward, oriented not toward the city's approaches, but toward a specific district within the city. This is a critically important distinction. Outward-facing air defense protects against external threats. Inward-facing air defense, or more precisely, air defense concentrated around a specific internal location, suggests that what is being protected is not the city itself, but a specific high-value asset within it. The positioning said, in effect, whatever is here, in this specific place, is more important than the broader perimeter. Combined with the thermal signatures, the encrypted traffic anomalies, and the convoy route change, the inward-facing air defense created a compelling picture. Not certainty, not yet, but a strong analytical assessment that something or someone of extraordinary importance was present in that district. The cyber dimension of the intelligence picture added another layer. In the days following the pattern break, Iranian communications networks showed a distinctive profile. Digital communication volume in certain IRGC channels dropped. Courier activity, the movement of physical messages by human carriers, increased. Localized signal blackouts appeared in certain areas, periods of deliberate electromagnetic silence that created, paradoxically, their own signature. This technique, identifying targets not by the signals they emit, but by the distinctive silence that appears where signals should be, is known in the intelligence community as silence mapping. It is a particularly sophisticated form of signals intelligence that requires extensive baseline data to execute effectively. You have to know what normal looks like before you can identify what absence means. But when silence mapping is applied to a well-documented target environment, the sudden disappearance of signals from a location that normally generates them is often more informative than the signals themselves. It says, something here is being deliberately concealed. The act of concealment is the data. Analysts had been building the baseline for months. When the silence appeared, they knew what it meant. Technology had narrowed the picture to a district, a time frame, and a set of behaviors consistent with the presence of a senior leadership figure. But technology alone could not answer the final question. The analytical picture pointed strongly toward Mojtaba Khamenei's presence in that location. It did not confirm it. And in the world of precision targeting, where the decision to strike a specific location carries consequences that cannot be undone, Yao said, analytical probability is not the same as operational confirmation. For that, you need a human being inside the network. The precise circumstances of how the human intelligence confirmation reached Western analysts have not been publicly disclosed, and given the nature of human operations involving assets inside Iran's most protected circles, they may never be. What is known, what has been reported through multiple intelligence channels, is that at some point in the 72 hours before the strike, a fragment of information arrived that moved the operation from the analytical phase to the targeting phase. The fragment, by all accounts, was minimal. It contained no elaborate detail, no extensive documentation, no technical confirmation. It said, in effect, the sun is present. No name attached, no elaboration, no timestamp, no corroborating documentation. Just that fragment, arriving through whatever channel had been established over whatever period of time the source had been cultivated, carrying the weight of everything that surrounded it. The signal's intelligence, the satellite data, the behavioral analysis, the silence mapping, all of it pointing to the same location, all of it waiting for the single confirmation that only a human being in proximity to the target could provide. In the context of that accumulated picture, the fragment was enough. The sun is present. Mojtaba Khamenei, the invisible heir, the man who had spent his career learning to leave no trace, was inside the compound. The target was fixed, the kill chain activated. In modern military planning, the kill chain is a framework for transforming intelligence into action. It has 6 stages: find, fix, track, target, engage, assess. Each stage must function without critical failure, because in high-level targeting operations against a low-signature target, a failure at any point means the opportunity disappears, possibly permanently. You find the target, then fix their location with precision, then track them to confirm continued presence, then build the target package, then execute the strike, then assess the results. The whole chain must hold. By the time the human fragment arrived, the chain was already well advanced. The find phase had been underway for months. The fix phase had been accomplished through the convergence of signals, satellite, and human intelligence. Track was ongoing. continuous ISR, intelligence surveillance, and reconnaissance assets maintaining observation of the compound. In the final 48 hours, the target package was finalized. Strike assets were assigned. Electronic warfare units were positioned to support the operation. Multiple abort triggers were embedded in the strike plan, specific conditions under which the operation would be immediately halted. The most critical of those triggers was simple. If Mojtaba left the compound before the strike window closed, the operation would stop. Because the objective was not to destroy the location, the objective was to neutralize the person inside it. Without confirmation of continued presence, the strike had no justification. The final 12 hours of ISR showed no exit from the compound. Underground activity continued. The behavioral picture remained consistent. Decoy movements appeared in the surrounding district. Convoy activity that, to a less experienced analytical team, might have suggested the high-value target was leaving. But pattern analysts flagged the decoys almost immediately. The movements were behaviorally inconsistent with genuine evacuation protocols. The timing was wrong, the routes were wrong, the security choreography was wrong in ways that experienced analysts, who had spent months studying the normal patterns, could identify as manufactured. Iran had deployed decoys. The decoys failed. At T0 on February 28, 2026, the strike began. The attack itself was not designed for spectacle. There are strikes designed to send messages through visible destruction, to level facilities, create craters, generate imagery that communicates power to external audiences. This was not that kind of strike. This was a precision operation designed for penetration. The compound's hardened underground structures were the primary target, and reaching them required munitions specifically engineered for that purpose. Penetrating warheads capable of driving through reinforced concrete before detonating in the enclosed spaces below. Surface damage from this kind of strike can appear limited, almost anticlimactic to anyone expecting the dramatic destruction associated with conventional bombing. What happens above ground is largely incidental. The effects that matter happen below. Electronic warfare preceded the kinetic strike, blinding Iranian radar systems for a critical window of seconds, long enough to deny early warning to air defense units, short enough to limit detection of the electronic suppression itself. Stealth platforms minimized the radar signature of the strike package during approach. Coordinated timing compressed the response window available to Iranian forces on the ground. Above Tehran's northern district, the strike lasted a matter of seconds. Below ground, the physics were catastrophic. Hardened bunkers are built to resist external blast pressure, the shockwave of an explosion propagating outward from a surface detonation. They are significantly more vulnerable to what happens when that detonation occurs inside the structure, or when a penetrating warhead delivers its energy directly into the enclosed space. Pressure shock waves travel through concrete corridors and amplify at junctions. Structural integrity in confined spaces fails in ways that are difficult to predict from outside. Air displacement, the sudden violent movement of atmosphere within a sealed space, creates secondary lethality independent of the primary blast. The underground environment that is designed as protection becomes, under these conditions, a liability. Survival in that environment depends on location relative to the detonation point, structural characteristics of the specific space, and a degree of chance that no amount of careful security planning can eliminate entirely. Mojtaba Khamenei was inside that environment when the munitions struck. The question of what happened to him next is where certainty ends and the fog of modern intelligence warfare begins. In the hours immediately following the strike, Iran's response was swift, coordinated, and almost entirely opaque. IRGC units sealed off the affected district. The security perimeter went up with a speed that suggested pre-planned emergency protocols, not improvisation in response to a surprise attack, but the activation of procedures that had been prepared for exactly this scenario. Communications from the district dropped sharply, consistent with an enforced blackout rather than infrastructure damage. Medical activity, The movement of personnel and supplies associated with treating casualties took place underground rather than at surface hospitals, an operational choice that indicated the regime was treating the identity and condition of its casualties as a classified matter. The information management that followed was a masterclass in controlled ambiguity. Iranian state media confirmed the strike within hours. There was no realistic option to deny a kinetic attack on Tehran that the entire city had felt. But the framing was relentlessly optimistic. Leadership was safe. The supreme leader, at that point still Ali Khamenei, had been in a secure location. The attack had been repelled. The state was functioning. In the specific question of Mojtaba's condition, official statements were brief and consistent. He had been present at or near the site. He had sustained minor injuries. He was receiving appropriate medical attention, and his condition was not a cause for concern. Those statements were delivered through intermediaries. No video, no public appearance, no independent verification. And as the hours stretched into days, and the days into weeks, the absence of any visual confirmation of Mojtaba Khamenei's condition became, in itself, the most significant piece of evidence available to outside analysts. 3 distinct narratives had emerged within days of the strike, and they remain in competition to this day. The first is the official Iranian account. Mojtaba Khamenei survived with minor injuries, assumed the position of supreme leader through a legitimate process of clerical elevation, and is actively directing the affairs of the Iranian state. His absence from public view is a matter of security. Given that his father was killed in the same strike, extraordinary precautions around the new supreme leader are simply prudent. The second narrative comes from Western intelligence assessments, which have been described in various reports as suggesting Mojtaba sustained injuries that were significantly more serious than Iranian officials acknowledged, possibly incapacitating, possibly affecting cognitive function, possibly creating a situation in which the Islamic Republic elevated to its highest position a man who cannot effectively exercise that position's responsibilities. The third narrative is the darkest, the most speculative, and the most difficult to either confirm or dismiss. That Mojtaba Khamenei's injuries were fatal or near fatal, that what the Iranian state elevated to supreme leader was a title rather than a functioning individual, and that the IRGC moved immediately to fill the power vacuum while projecting a fiction of leadership continuity. None of these narratives has been conclusively proven. The ambiguity is not accidental. It is, as we'll see, a strategic choice. I have to pause here because there's something I want to ask you. The people who planned this strike, the analysts, the targeting officers, the decision makers who set this chain of events in motion, they were pursuing a strategic objective that required not just killing a leader, but accepting the possibility of killing a successor who had not yet formally assumed power. They were, in a sense, choosing the terms of the succession itself. If you had been in that position, knowing that acting might destabilize an entire state and create unpredictable consequences, but knowing that not acting might mean losing the window forever, what would you have done? Drop your answer in the comments. I'm genuinely curious about how you think through that dilemma. Here's what the weeks after the strike revealed. The elevation of Mojtaba Khamenei to the position of supreme leader happened with a speed that surprised even analysts who had been tracking Iranian succession dynamics closely. The Assembly of Experts, the clerical body with formal authority to select Iran's supreme leader, convened within days of Ali Khamenei's death and announced Mojtaba's elevation through a process that was, by Iranian constitutional standards, procedurally legitimate. The speed of the decision reflected either extraordinary advance preparation, which would suggest the regime had been planning for exactly this contingency, or an urgent political need to project stability in the immediate aftermath of a catastrophic leadership strike. Possibly both. What the elevation did not produce was the thing that would have reassured outside observers most, a public appearance by the new supreme leader. Intelligence analysts and foreign policy observers began, in the days following the elevation, to catalog the specific absences. Mojtaba had not delivered a public address. He had not received foreign delegations in any verified setting. no independently authenticated video or photographic evidence of his condition had emerged from Iranian state media. Only statements attributed to him through official channels, their authenticity unverifiable. The new supreme leader of the Islamic Republic of Iran was, for all practical observational purposes, as invisible as he had always been. But the Iranian state was not invisible. It was functioning. Military operations continued and, in some respects, intensified. IRGC commanders appeared publicly, delivered statements, directed forces. Iranian air defenses responded to subsequent strikes. Ballistic missile launches proceeded on schedules that suggested coherent operational planning. The machinery of the Iranian state, the bureaucratic and military infrastructure that had been built over decades, continued to operate without visible degradation. This created the central paradox of the post-strike period, a state that was either led by a man too severely injured to appear publicly, or led by the institutional architecture that had always, in practice, wielded operational power, with the supreme leader position as an important, but not always operationally decisive element of that architecture. Understanding that paradox requires understanding what the IRGC actually is within the Iranian system. The Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps is not simply a military force, it is a parallel state. It has its own intelligence apparatus, the IRGC Intelligence Organization, that operates independently of the Ministry of Intelligence. It controls significant portions of Iran's economy through business networks that generate independent revenue. It runs its own diplomatic and strategic relationships with proxy forces across the region, Hezbollah in Lebanon, the Houthi movement in Yemen, various Iraqi militias. It manages internal security with a thoroughness that extends into every corner of Iranian civil life. The IRGC's relationship with the supreme leader in the Iranian constitutional system is supposed to be one of loyal subordination. The Revolutionary Guards serve the supreme leader and are ideologically committed to the system he represents. But the practical relationship is more complex. The IRGC has over decades developed institutional interests, capabilities, and networks that give it a degree of independent operational capacity that does not require moment-to-moment direction from the supreme leader to function. In the weeks following the February 28th strike, it was the IRGC that was visible. IRGC commanders briefed the public on military operations. IRGC units executed strategic responses. IRGC-aligned media managed the information environment. Whether Mujtaba was actively directing this apparatus or not, the apparatus was directing itself and attributing its decisions upward to a supreme leader whose condition could not be independently verified. This is what regime resilience actually looks like in practice. It is not the resilience of a single leader. It is the resilience of a system designed to absorb leadership decapitation without catastrophic collapse, to root around damage at the top, to maintain functional coherence even when the nominal leadership layer is degraded or absent. The planners of the February 28th strike were almost certainly aware of this, which raises a question that goes to the heart of what the operation was actually designed to achieve. There is a conventional understanding of what a decapitation strike accomplishes. You remove a leader. You create confusion and dysfunction at the top of the opposing structure. You degrade the enemy's ability to make coherent decisions and execute coordinated strategy. You win. This understanding is not wrong exactly. Leadership matters. The death of Ali Khamenei, a figure who had led Iran for more than 3 decades, who had shaped its ideology and institutions and strategic culture in ways that reached into every corner of the state, was genuinely significant. The transition of any system from a long-tenured leader to a successor, even a planned and prepared succession, creates real friction. There were decisions that Ali Khamenei would have made, based on relationships and instincts and judgment built over 30 years, that Mujtaba, or whoever was actually directing Iranian affairs in the weeks that followed, could not simply replicate. But the planners of the February 28th strike appear to have understood something more sophisticated than the conventional decapitation logic, that the strike itself, regardless of its direct effects on Mujtaba's capacity, would function as an intelligence operation, as much as a kinetic operation. Every system has emergency protocols. The protocols that activate when a high-value target is struck reveal the architecture of that system in ways that normal operations deliberately conceal. When the IRGC sealed off the Northern District in the immediate aftermath, the speed and completeness of that response told analysts something about pre-planned emergency procedures they had not previously been able to observe directly. When communications blackouts appeared in specific channels while others remained active, the pattern of what went dark and what stayed lit revealed something about the command architecture and the relative priority of different communication pathways. When medical activity occurred underground rather than at surface facilities, it confirmed the locations and capacities of certain subsurface infrastructure. Every Iranian response to the strike was, simultaneously, a piece of intelligence about the Iranian system. The forced activation of emergency protocols generated data. The information management decisions revealed priorities. The IRGC's visible consolidation of operational control confirmed analytical assessments about the organization's actual role versus its nominal role. The speed of the clerical succession process and the specific individuals who drove it provided information about the internal power dynamics within Iranian religious and political circles. And Mujtaba's continued absence, the sustained weeks-long failure to produce a public appearance, became itself the most consequential data point in the picture. Because the absence had to be explained, and the possible explanations were limited, and each explanation had different implications for the future trajectory of the conflict and the Iranian state. If Mujtaba was severely incapacitated, Iran was being led by institutional momentum and IRGC decision-making rather than by the kind of centralized, ideologically coherent leadership that the supreme leader position is designed to provide. That was information of immense strategic value, information about the internal stability and the actual decision-making architecture of the adversary. If Mujtaba was able to function but was being concealed for security reasons, then the intelligence value lay in understanding what Iran considered too risky to expose publicly, which revealed something about the regime's own assessment of its vulnerability to follow-up strikes. And if the darkest version was true, if the new supreme leader was in critical condition or worse, then the Iranian state was operating under a fiction of leadership continuity. And the question was how long that fiction could be maintained and what would happen when it broke. Each possibility shaped a different strategic picture, and the strike, by creating the conditions that generated this picture, had accomplished something that no amount of routine surveillance could have achieved. This is what the most sophisticated practitioners of intelligence warfare understand, that a kinetic action is also an intelligence action, that forcing an adversary to respond reveals the adversary's architecture, that the information generated by an operation can be as strategically valuable as the direct physical effects of that operation. The February 28th strike was designed to find and fix and engage a high-value target, but it was also designed to make Iran react and to learn from every movement of that reaction. Months after the strike, the core mystery remains unresolved, and it is worth sitting with that unresolved for a moment, because it is not a failure of the operation. It is the operation's most distinctive strategic legacy. Mujtaba Khamenei has not appeared publicly in any verifiable form since February 28th. No independently authenticated evidence of his current condition exists. The Islamic Republic of Iran has a supreme leader whose health and capacity the outside world cannot confirm, and yet the Iranian state continues to function, to prosecute military operations, to manage internal politics, to project power through its network of regional allies, to escalate and de-escalate and negotiate as circumstances require. The man at the center of this picture has become something more complicated than a wounded or incapacitated or possibly deceased individual. He has become a strategic symbol of the uncertainty that defines this conflict. His invisibility, which was once a personal choice designed to protect him from targeting, is now being deployed by the Iranian state deliberately as a form of strategic defense. A leader who cannot be seen cannot be confirmed as weakened. A leader whose condition is ambiguous cannot be definitively replaced in ways that would signal internal instability to external observers. A leader who exists in the space between confirmed presence and confirmed absence forces every adversary to plan for multiple contingencies simultaneously: the possibility of a functioning supreme leader, the possibility of institutional autopilot, the possibility of a more fragmented power structure in which the IRGC commanders who are visible are making decisions that the unseen supreme leader is nominally authorizing. In intelligence terms, ambiguity becomes defense. Uncertainty imposed on an adversary is a strategic asset, and Iran is managing that asset with considerable sophistication. This creates a particular challenge for Western intelligence agencies, who now face a targeting problem of unusual complexity. The question is no longer simply where Mojtaba Khamenei is. The question is what the Iranian decision-making architecture actually looks like in his absence. Who is making which decisions, through what processes, under what constraints, with what degree of coherence and coordination. Those questions cannot be answered through satellite imagery or signals intelligence alone. They require deep penetration of the Iranian command environment, the kind of penetration that takes years to develop and is lost in an instant if operational security fails. Meanwhile, the war continues, strikes and counterstrikes, escalations and negotiations, the grinding daily reality of a conflict that has now passed its first year and shows no clear path to resolution. And somewhere in that reality, in a bunker, perhaps, or in a secure medical facility, or in a room that the outside world's surveillance systems have not yet found, Mojtaba Khamenei exists in a state that cannot be confirmed, powerful perhaps, incapacitated perhaps, present in some form, but unseen. If you've stayed with this story to the end, thank you, genuinely. The 2026 Iran War is one of the most complex and consequential intelligence stories of our time, and the Mojtaba Khamenei question sits at its center, unresolved and significant. This channel brings you real intelligence stories like this one every single day. The operations, the tradecraft, the human decisions behind events that are shaping the world right now. If you haven't subscribed yet, this is the moment. Hit that button and turn on notifications so you never miss an episode. But there's one final dimension to this story, one final layer of strategic complexity that deserves a moment before we close. So, what do you think? Was the February 28th strike justified, given what followed? Was the creation of this ongoing uncertainty, this leaderless, or possibly leaderless, or ambiguously led Iranian state, a strategic success or an unintended consequence? And what does it mean for the future of warfare that the most consequential question in one of the world's most active conflicts is simply, is the leader alive? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I read everyone, and this is exactly the kind of question I want to hear your perspective on. Because here's the final truth of the Mojtaba Khamenei story, the truth that sits beneath all the intelligence analysis and targeting methodology and strategic complexity. The physical strike lasted seconds. The uncertainty it created, the uncertainty about his condition, about who holds power in Tehran, about how the Iranian state makes its decisions, and what those decisions will be next month and next year, that uncertainty is not a side effect of the operation. It is the operation's most durable product. In traditional warfare, success is measured in destruction, territory taken, forces degraded, infrastructure eliminated. Those measures are real and they matter. But in the intelligence warfare that underlies and shapes, and in many ways drives modern conflict, success is measured in something more subtle and more lasting. Information gained, systems disrupted, adversary decision-making compromised, strategic uncertainty imposed on an opponent who can no longer be sure of their own leadership, their own command architecture, their own position in the conflict they are trying to prosecute. By those measures, the February 28th strike achieved something beyond what a straightforward reading of its physical effects would suggest. It killed Ali Khamenei. It wounded, or worse, his son and successor. It forced the activation of emergency protocols that revealed the internal architecture of the Iranian command system. It generated a succession crisis whose dimensions the Iranian state is still managing. And it created, in the figure of the unseen supreme leader, a strategic ambiguity that will shape every calculation every adversary makes about Iran for months and possibly years to come. Somewhere beneath Tehran, or in a facility that the world's most sophisticated intelligence agencies have not yet located, Mojtaba Khamenei exists in a state that defines what this war has become: unseen, unconfirmed, unresolved. The man who spent his life learning to be invisible is now, in his absence, shaping the future of a conflict that millions of people are living through. That is the true measure of how much one ghost can matter,